Response Program webinar for today, a learning community's roadmap to recovery following a bushfire. My name is Ben Rogers and I'm the manager of community trauma at Emerging Minds. If you haven't attended a session like this before, you'll notice that you won't be able to use your mic or webcam today. You are in webinar only mode. This is just due to a large number of attendees online today. You'll be able to answer some questions in the Q&A function. You'll see that at the bottom of your screen. And we have some of our lovely colleagues who will be able to answer those today. We'll have quite a spacious Q&A at the end with the presenters as well. So please do feed through your questions as you go. I'd like to start by acknowledging that I'm meeting on the traditional country of the Kaurna people and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. I'd also like to acknowledge the deep connection that the Kaurna people have with the land and the waters of this country. I'd also like to acknowledge that the lands of the presenters and where they're meeting today, the Djadjawurrung, the Wurundjeri and Bunurong people of the Kulin Nation. And welcome any other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are joining us for the webinar today. So before we get started today and get into the content, it's really important to take a moment to remember that when we're talking about mental health in any context, including community trauma, that it can affect us in different ways. So today our panelists will be talking about their own personal experiences of bushfires. Additionally, you'll come with your own unique experiences as well. So if there's anything that's covered that raises any uncomfortable feelings for you, really do tune into your self-care strategies. And also that at times might be to take a bit of a break. So just knowing that we are recording today's webinar and you can watch this at a later date can be helpful as well. But if there are any ongoing concerns that arise as a result of this presentation, please do access the Wellbeing tools from the BU website, as well as your employee assistance program and their support services. You can see on this infographic here, there's also a variety of different services and supports that you can contact. And you'll notice we'll be putting different things in the chat as we speak, so you'll notice some other services that are popping up there as well. So this is our third of a series of webinars presented by the BU Bushfire Response Program and hosted by Emerging Minds. I'm really excited to bring this content and presenters to you today. This is a series of webinars that have been focused on the 13 priority areas which we've been supporting through the Bushfire Response Program. I'll go over the program in a little bit in a moment, but I just wanted to say a big g'day and hello to everyone that's out there from those regions, and thanks for joining us today. We also wanted to welcome the other educators who are joining us from across the country, particularly those that are joining us from areas which have been recently impacted by flooding over the last few months. We hope you're doing okay, and please do tune into your own self-care needs as we explore this topic. So you'll see the three really clear learning objectives for today. We're going to look at supporting your understanding of key factors which influence recovery following a bushfire. We'll look at the key approaches which can support a learning community as part of bushfire recovery, and really focusing on the educator's role in supporting children and young people as part of bushfire recovery. So just to set a little bit of context about the program, the Bushfire Response Program is funded by the Commonwealth Department of Health and Department of Education, Skills and Employment. The focus is on delivering mental health support to schools and early learning services which were impacted by the 2019-2020 bushfires. So the program is led by BU, Beyond Blue, as part of the BU program, and the delivery partners Early Childhood Australia, Headspace and Emerging Minds are also involved. And as you can see by this image here, we've supported around 400 learning communities. And an essential component of this program has been the contact liaison officers, the CLOs. So hello to the CLOs across the country, also known as CLOs. But we really wanted to say g'day to everyone joining us from your regions. And their role has been focused on providing direct support to schools and early learning services. So a big part of their role has been providing trauma support and guidance information and workshops, looking at service mapping in the regions, as well as recovery planning with those services. Part of the program, we've also linked with stakeholder and service providers who've been providing recovery and resilience activities in the community. So as we move towards July 2021, learning communities will begin to transition from the BRP over to the BU National Mental Health Initiative. So these learning communities will have access to ongoing supports through a BU consultant. So if you are in a learning community and haven't yet connected with BU, here's some more information that you can engage in. It's a free service. It could be online and there'll be some targeted events, as well as your very own BU consultant. So it's my pleasure now to introduce today's presenters to the webinar. I'd like to introduce Lisa Gibbs, Janette Cook, and Michelle Roberts. Welcome. Hi. So before we get into each of your presentations today, I wanted to invite each of you to share with the audience a little bit about what's captured your interest in this area. And we might start with you, Lisa, if that's okay.
Sure.
So as a researcher, what's drawn your interest into the area of bushfire recovery?
Well, I'm a public health academic, and so our focus is on the social and environmental influences on health and well-being. And of course, disasters are such an extreme context, and it's really important to have a look at what are the factors that we can influence that might promote the best outcomes possible.
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. I'm looking forward to hearing your perspective today.
Thanks, Ben.
Janette, you were the principal at Middle Kinglake Primary when the 2009 Black Saturday bushfires impacted both the school and the community. How has this shaped your work in this area?
Yes, well, Ben, I started as principal at Middle Kinglake in 2007, so I was there for a little while before then, and right until I retired towards the end of 2014. So I was in that role when Black Saturday hit, and in the ensuing years when our school and the community was rebuilding. And ours was one of the 3 small Victorian schools that was destroyed on Black Saturday. So it's quite an impact on my life, I guess, from that time from our.
Yeah, thank you, Janette. Yeah, you have a really unique perspective that I'm sure the audience are looking forward to hearing today, so thank you. And Michelle, welcome. As an educator and psychologist, tell us a little bit about your experience in the bushfire recovery space.
My experience goes back to the Ash Wednesday bushfires in 1983 as a first-year out teacher, where I was able to observe and be part of the ongoing impacts of the bushfires on my students, and it was a secondary school that I was teaching at. That probably catapulted me into the fascination with working in the disaster context and with school communities to assist their recovery. And in the last 30 odd years, I've continued to work in the disaster areas and other areas of adversity as a psychologist, as a school psychologist, and also working in community before, during, and after disasters.
Thank you, Michelle. Yeah, and so thanks to Michelle, Janette, and Lisa. I'd really like to extend a big virtual welcome from the audience to you today. So welcome to this webinar, and we'll start the presentation off by hearing from Lisa. So over to you, Lisa.
Thanks, Ben. So I'm starting off just talking about some of our research findings in this space, and just want to, I guess, as an important reflection that even though today we're focusing on learning communities, those learning communities are part of the broader community, which is also really disrupted and impacted by whatever disaster event has occurred. And I'll be drawing on research that we conducted in the 10 Years Beyond Bushfires study, where we followed people and communities and worked with them for 10 years following the Black Saturday bushfires. And because of their generosity, we've learnt so much about what happens. And I guess, you know, one of the features of post-disaster communities is the really significant changes that are occurring and continue to occur in the years after these events. And while people are extraordinarily resilient in what they can cope with and adapt to, there is no question that we see an increased risk of people experiencing mental illness following these events. And in fact, when we have a look at how that tracks over the 10 years after the event, we can see in this image here that in our highly impacted communities, the incidence of mental health problems is typically more than twice as much as we see in communities where there was low or no bushfire impact. And that actually extended for well, 10 years afterwards. And that's really alarming. And that's why we really need to kind of understand how can we make a difference here. One of the findings we had was that contributing factors to these kind of prolonged experiences of poor mental health were those really important disruptions that do happen afterwards. So where people have experienced a loss of income, a loss of accommodation, and often they'll experience a relationship strain or breakdown, that's where we see that they're really having difficulty getting back on track and can develop symptoms that are consistent with a mental health disorder. But what's encouraging is that there are also things that make a positive difference. And one of those is involvement in local community groups. We found that that was clearly coming through as a protective factor. And when we monitored that up to 5 years afterwards, that was a consistent finding. And in fact, in communities where many people belong to community groups, the benefits extended beyond those individuals who were group members to others in the community. So in communities where you have a high level of group involvement, we see positive outcomes. And that doesn't mean everything's rosy and fine when everyone comes together, because it's a difficult time and people get tired and frustrated, but there do seem to be real benefits from coming together and looking out for each other. And why this is important to the school environment is because the school is a community hub. It is a place where people come together, and it's a place where people connect with other groups like the netball club and the cricket team and so on. But when we also had a look at learning outcomes for students, it really alerted us to the longer term implications of this sort of exposure. So as you can see in this image here, we followed students in Victoria who began school the year before the Black Saturday bushfires and looked at how they were tracking academically in grades 3 through to grade 5, and found that they weren't progressing as at the same rate as you would normally expect compared to their peers. That doesn't mean that's all the students, but this was a pattern we were seeing for this group of students. And indeed, when we followed them through to secondary school, to year 7 and 9, and we looked at their academic scores, they were on average behind their peers in every subject. And of course, this is way down the track in terms of their schooling. And so it may be that parents, teachers are not making the connection from that disaster event in 2009 to their schooling 8 years later. And that particular cohort of students were our year 12 students last year who completed school in a year characterised by bushfires and the pandemic. So we really got to look out for these students and where they go next. But the encouraging thing is that these educational settings are really health promoting. There's an opportunity within those settings to make a difference. And while we're still developing evidence about the best way to deliver and design these recovery programs, there is international evidence that school-based programs conducted by trained teachers or other professionals in the school can make a difference in promoting mental health outcomes for children and teenagers. I guess one of the challenges for school leaders is making the choice of which tool, which program that they should be delivering in their schools. And often they're presented with all sorts of options. Who knows where to start? And so the Department of Education here in Victoria commissioned us to develop these tools for principals or school leaders that are really just designed to be a checklist. So you can go through and go, okay, within our school, what sort of program might we be needing and how would we want it to be delivered for our school community? And then there's a matching tool for the program providers to say, this is what we offer with our program and this is how we would deliver it. So you can just do a quick check what the school is needing, what the program is offering to help with that decision making. And I believe that the link to that tool has been put in the chat box because it is available for anyone to use. So I'll probably leave it there. That's really just a bit of a teaser for the sort of research that we're conducting. But really the focus in our research and how we interpret the findings is very much informed by the discussions that I've had and my colleagues have had with Michelle and with Janette and others who are out there in the field. And I'm sure they will be able to provide the context for the research that I've just presented. So over to you, Janette.
Thanks, Lisa. I just wanted to start with a little bit of the thinking behind that appraisal tool. It was developed to support schools in making decisions about which programs they will link into. After an event, you can be absolutely overwhelmed with offers of support, and some of those people are quite pushy and just sometimes even just land on your doorstep. So the principal and the leadership team take on the role of being a filter for programs and people that let into the school. So the appraisal tool offers the chance to get a bit of breathing space before making a decision. So the provider needs to provide to give the evidence that they've got their post checks, that any previous work that they've done with communities after a disaster, things that can be time consuming for schools to follow up. It also makes the provider really reflect on what elements of the program they're offering. And we want to ensure that any outside supports given to schools are actually going to have a positive effect on our young people and not be causing harm. So these are the aspects that learning communities and educational settings take on after a disaster. We're always really good at focusing on both the academic learning and the wellbeing of all of our students, and increasingly, I think, of our staff as well. After the bushfires, was a real shift in need to put increased energies into the health and wellbeing aspect in order for us to be able to maintain that focus on the academic learning. We introduced additional creative opportunities for the students to express themselves, so lots of opportunities through art and music and writing. And we also increased opportunities through relaxation and mindfulness to try and alleviate anxiety. Educational settings are well placed to, I'm not going to start with the top one, I'll come back to that one. I think as teachers and educators, we're really good at looking out for others. We are able to see when somebody needs support and provide that support for them. And we also act as a dissemination point, I suppose, that we're able to point families into the direction of organisations that can help and provide that vital link in the communication chain. As staff, though, I don't think we're as good at looking after ourselves with self-care strategies. We know how important it is, and we're pretty good at insisting that others take care of themselves and follow the advice, that we're probably not as good at implementing those strategies to look after ourselves. The Children and Disaster Advisory Group came up with 6 recommendations that have been included in the 10 years and beyond bushfire report. And I'd just like to go briefly through those. The first one was to provide intensive support programs for students, for staff prior to the students returning to school. I think it's important for the department and agencies to check in with staff to find out how they're going, what their situation is, and what support systems they might need to be put in place before the students come back. Also to start preparing for how the students and families might be presenting when they come back to school and how best to support them. This support needs to be delivered at regular and key intervals. It's nobody's in the same place at the same time, and each setting, even if they might have gone through a fire at the same time, will have different needs and need those things at different times. The other thing I think is really important is if that support is able to be provided by the same personnel. It's really important for students, staff and families to receive a consistent message, but also to be able to be given the time to build trusting relationships so they don't feel that they need to go over their story multiple times. As I said, the support needs to be tailored to the particular needs of the individual settings, not all settings will be the same. And if the same program is delivered en masse, it can be very alienating to be treated as if you do have the same needs as others. We can, like students, we can only take on the information that we're ready to take on, and especially when we're stressed. So it's important for that to be individualised. That same consistent message and support for families, whether it be early childhood, childcare, or in maternal health or in school, is really vital and needs to be provided in a setting that is comfortable and where parents feel supported. Those programs for parents, again, need to be individualised, and they might include aspects like support for parenting, but also for self-care. I think sometimes we forget about parents and self-care as well. It's important to have continued monitoring and keep in touch base with each of those settings on a regular basis, and to monitor current needs. Often students and staff will be travelling really well, and then 6 months down the track or a little bit further, some will start to fall in a heap and will have different needs. So it's important to continue those sorts of checks, and especially at times like leading into anniversaries and other events that might present as triggers. I think it's important for the department to be flexible with timelines for school compliance. School communities won't be in a clear headspace in the first or second year after a major event to do justice to developing things like new strategic plans. And then the last recommendation was to appoint additional staff and volunteers for extra administration to assist with the various tasks that you did not know were going to happen. You get inundated with donations that need to be sorted. Students need support for presenting with additional or delayed academic or social growth, and these can happen at various times. And it's also the staff that need support as well for their own welfare needs, but also physical needs. I know I didn't say no after a while, took me a while, to accept having a support person to help with bills and phone calls that I wasn't able to make. So sometimes we think we don't need these things, but in order to do our jobs, we do. So that additional staff also around the classrooms will help teachers to meet students at their point of need. We can never predict when the student might be going to have a meltdown or what's caused the trigger, and the classroom teacher is the best person to be able to assist them at that time. So those are the recommendations that have been included in the 10 Years and Beyond research. Over to you, Michelle.
Thanks, Janette. Well, I guess having heard from Lisa and heard from Janette, there's some points that they've made that I'd like to pull out and draw your attention back to. The notion that support for staff before students is an important one, and it comes from the original work by Naomi Baum in Israel. Unfortunately, poor Israel is struggling at the moment, and there'll be opportunities to keep on supporting school communities through the current discord that they're experiencing. We often see schools getting back together and starting after a disaster as the first important milestone for returning to some sense of normality, and that it's seen as a mental health intervention in its own right. But if staff are still grieving, distressed, hyper-aroused and unable to be fully present, it's not going to be the success that we hope it would be. And so I really want to reiterate that it's very important that we ground our staff and give them an opportunity to settle before we ask them to settle the students that they're working with. The other point that resonated with me was that sometimes all the services that are offering their support and converge on school communities can be a secondary adversity in themselves. And Lisa used the term a disruptor. And I know from 2009, many of the schools in the end refused to let outside organisations in their schools just because it kept on interrupting what they were trying to do with the students and what was going to allow them to get into a routine that was matched to the students' need at that stage. And of course, the long-term impacts of bushfires. We're 18 months in the journey from the Black Summer fires, and we've had the interruptions of COVID and a host of other things occur in that period of time. We know that there's adverse impacts on academic learning in the short and long term. In the short term, I often see it related to executive functioning skills, working memory, and struggles to hold in mind and concentrate. And we can see the compounding effects of that for children as they move through school. So they were the learnings that came from Lisa and Janette's discussions that really sat with me. So when we look at research to practice and we look at the clinical and the educational perspective, we're looking at the impact of adversity. And we know there's impact on learning. We know there's an impact on the developmental trajectory that child was on, and whether it was normative or not, it was their trajectory and how they were going along their path of development. It's especially evident in the 0 to 4 age group where there's so much rapid neurodevelopment happening that it's not hard to bump them off that pathway that they're on. And for all our early educators, the mindfulness that we need to have to try and support the children in getting back on the pathway of what we see as healthy and well development. The challenges of all the other adversities and disruptions that Lisa referred to are really evident, and often they're the things that when I work with students, they say to me have been the biggest challenge for them. It's the change in home, the displacement from their environment, their family home, the change in the family culture, the financial stresses, the difficulty of mum and dad coping with their own situations, and the inability to be able to stop the pain that they're witnessing in the adults around them that can trigger children and make them feel particularly unsafe and concerned as well. So those secondary adversities need to be considered. And when I'm working with students in schools, I actually map with each student or with each class what are some of those challenges. So the factors which influence recovery following a bushfire include things like being able to restore a sense of psychological safety and physical safety for those students, to give them a sense of predictability and routine with just enough flexibility to be able to allow whatever happens in the day to meet the needs of the child. And Janette can, I'm sure, talk with you about students who had breakdowns in class, staff who were distressed and had to leave their class. So predictability is important, but it's not always that easy to achieve. So we keep on trying to bring it back to a safety for students and staff, and to provide opportunity for calm, meaning making, and always promoting the sense of future and agency for our students and our staff. With timelines and expectations, we always want to use a developmental lens to measure what it is we're seeing. And we've spoken a number of times today already about the monitoring. And one paediatrician spoke to me about the skill paediatricians have, which is surveillance. It's a bit of a spookier term than monitoring, but what we're talking about is you know the child not just in one point of time, but over a period of time. And that allows you to gauge how they're travelling at any point in time and what additional supports they might need. So working with educators in learning centres, we need to help everyone feel psychologically safe and comfortable. And for the educators themselves, we want to speak about being professional in their professional self as well as their personal self. For some educators, coming to work is a welcome relief from the drama in their own home and environment, because often our educators experience the same disaster as our students do. And sometimes it's great to leave it at the door of the classroom and go in and be the teacher in control and know what you're doing. Sometimes that's a real challenge to achieve. Calming hyped arousal systems is really important, soothing and calm. And I always like to talk with teachers about the behaviour changes that they're seeing in themselves and their classes, and to help them understand what that's about and how they can manage them, and how they can help to soothe them, and how they can help to get everyone back on track so that they don't feel that things are out of control. So that psychoeducation and contextualisation of the changes is really important for teachers, the students and the young children and the families. So you're really quite an advocate for the young people in your charge, and you are the conduit to explaining to the people in their families of what you're seeing, what they're seeing, and why it's likely to be, and what they can do to help support their child. It's quite an onerous responsibility sometimes to realise what a difference schools can make to mental health outcomes, and we don't carry that responsibility lightly, I know, but that whole relationship that we have with students is such a valuable foundation for moving through this big adversity that they've experienced and giving them strategies to cope with it. Thank you. So being trauma-informed has been something that people in the last 18 months, when I've gone into schools to work with them, they've said, don't mention trauma. We don't want to talk about trauma. We don't want to talk about the bushfires. There's been drought, there's been floods, there's been pandemic, and there were the bushfires. And so we need to broaden it out and put it into a strength-based way of talking about it. But that's a challenge, because we also need to acknowledge the adversity. Not everyone only wants to focus on how they're moving forward. So using language is really important in this area, and using language that matches the culture of the school, the people that you're working with, and how people are making meaning of what's happened to them is vital. So whether you talk about resilience building, strength building, post-traumatic growth, trauma, adversity, it's acknowledging that there have been significant challenges and that we can build on existing strengths to be able to move forward with it. Thank you. So tips for providing informed support is to make sure that you yourself are balanced, calm, grounded, have the support you need to do the work that you're doing, to be trained in your knowledge around what adversity means for developing children and their families, and to take opportunity to continue to participate in webinars like this that just remind you, build on your existing knowledge and skills, or perhaps help you see something that you hadn't been aware of before. Some of the really effective tools that we have in our toolkits are ordinary magic. They're compassion, it's being hopeful, and having strong, solid, respectful relationships in which children and their families can feel safe to speak with you and to bounce ideas off you. And then for you to be able to have the capacity to contain what you're hearing. And that can be really tough. If you yourself have been through the same adversity, it might trigger anxiety and distress in you. But to be able to hold and to listen respectfully and to deal with what's coming your way, or to be able to say, I had a similar experience and it upsets me, but I'll bring in my friend and she can help you, is a really important strategy to have as a plan B for yourself. And of course, to know what you can do and what you can advise and what the referral pathways are in your school, whether it's the consultants that are coming in that you've established professional relationships, whether it's the wellbeing staff within your own school, or whether there's a teacher or a member of staff that that student has a strong connection with that you can link them into as a support. They're all very practical tools that you have in your toolkit all the time. Thank you. So there are lots of challenges for us in learning environments as educators. We have that dual role of being a survivor and impacted ourselves often, and being asked and expected to provide psychosocial and mental health support to our students and often their families as well, and even to our colleagues and peers. You can't escape it. You're immersed in the trauma of the reactions that are going on, and it can be hard to be bathing in that day in, day out. And so, as Janette said, being very mindful of your own well-being is such an important thing. To take a step out every now and then to do nice things for yourself, to get rid of the high levels of adrenaline and cortisol in your own system, because that will also impact on your ability to use executive functioning, working memory, to remember the words you wanted to use when you're teaching, and even to remember the content that you were going to use. So self-care is a key to keeping yourself where you want to be as a professional. Sometimes there's a failure to acknowledge the needs of educators, and Janette, in the Children Disasters Working Group, Janette highlighted that we spoke in terms of the machinery of education and learning centres keeps on rolling on, no matter what's happened. We're in NAPLAN stages in schools at the moment. I'm not sure what's happening in the early learning centres at this point in time, but there's always audits and accountability and reviews and budgets and all of those things. It's very hard to keep the day-to-day busyness happening while you're also being asked to do this additional work. And it's important that you reach out for help, or you say, slow it down if that's what you need to be, and you take a breath and you look at where your priorities are and where they need to be to keep things going as well as they can be. Sometimes educators feel that they aren't skilled enough and they don't have the confidence in their own abilities to work in this space. And I want to remind you of that term, ordinary magic, because you all have that skill set, you all have the relationships, you all know children and what's normative development and when it's not feeling quite right. And you know that when something's not feeling like it is as it should be, that speaking with a trusted colleague or one of the wellbeing staff or one of the mental health consultants that are working in your school is really important. Thank you.
Thanks, Michelle. Thanks, Janette and Lisa as well. And I welcome you back now for Q&A. And we've got lots of space now to answer some of the questions from the audience and to dive a bit deeper into some of these areas. And I'm just reflecting, Michelle, on that ordinary magic that you mentioned at the end there, and these kind of daily approaches and interactions that make a big difference. Yeah, and one of the audience members that we have here today is Early Childhood Perspectives. And Lisa, you touched on your research, and I'm just curious about, what your research shows around that early childhood space.
There's still a lot to learn there, Ben, but my greatest concern coming from our research and others is it tends to be an overlooked group at this time. We did an analysis of recovery funded services that were delivered in the 4 years following the Black Saturday bushfires and the ones that were particularly for children and youth. And the preschoolers and the lower primary, really there was hardly anything being delivered for them. And, I think it arises for a number of reasons, and I'm speculating here, but I think it arises because people aren't quite sure how to help that group. There's less known about what can be done there, but also there's often an assumption that because they're little that they'll forget, and if we don't talk about it and we don't deal with it, they won't retain it and won't be affected by it. And we do know that that's not the case. And in fact, even little ones who are born after the event show the impacts of being born into and growing up in a trauma-affected family and community. So I would suggest the research is pretty clear that we need to direct our attention to that age group.
Yeah, really interesting, Lisa. And Janette, I know with your school, there was an early learning service connected there. What other thoughts did you have around that?
Yes, then unfortunately, I have memories of the childcare settings in the last that was set up, which was really unfortunate for those children, but also it had a huge impact on the families because parents couldn't return to work because of that as well. The preschool and the maternal health was started to be built before any childcare setting was in place. So it was a bit tricky. Yes, I can see over time that things are improving in all of these areas. I hate to say that disasters follow me, but I was around an area that was flooded in the 90s and there was no support for schools. And again, at the start of 2000, in a bushfire area, very little support for schools. So I'm pleased to see, as a result of the University of Melbourne research, that hopefully we're moving in the right direction.
Yeah, thanks, Janette. Michelle, one of the things that you've touched on is the toolkit for educators and, you know, this idea of ordinary magic and the day-to-day kind of support that can assist children. For those educators listening in today, we've got early childhood, primary and secondary perspectives. What are some kind of key things that they could take from this webinar around that area?
If we think about early childhood as our starting point, the Birdie's Tree suite of resources is really spectacular in providing opportunity to, I guess, set up a context for children to talk about what their experience is. And as Lisa said, for a long time, we overlooked the experiences of those preschool age children, thinking that we didn't want to raise it just in case they hadn't noticed the fires occurring and the anxiety and stress, which of course is a furphy. Of course, they're feeling unsafe and frightened and taking their measure from the adults around them. We don't give them an opportunity necessarily to express what impact that's had on them. And so providing reading and discussion opportunity in a safe way is really important, monitoring what's happening to that child and how they're expressing their responses, and often that's somatically and behaviourally. And then looking at whether or not having a quiet conversation with that child, because if you do it more publicly, sometimes it triggers the other children. So you want to be protective and psychologically safe, but you need to get a measure of that child. So ordinary magic and tools in your toolkit are about building on the existing relationship and knowledge you've got, and then personalising it to that child, so that if they're being extraordinarily quiet and withdrawn, and before they were boisterous and an extrovert. And Andrew Fuller's just put his book out on the A to Z of emotions, and he talks about innies and outies, and that always works for me, because working with little children, I think about belly buttons because they love belly buttons, and there's innies and outies and all of those sorts of belly buttons. But there are the children who are withdrawn and hold it in and lose their social confidence and competence in the long term. And then there's the children who go the other way and can suddenly become outrageously difficult to manage in the classes. And they're often identified as having behaviour problems and being naughty, but our everyday tool encourages us to dig a little deeper, approach with curiosity and approach with a trauma-informed lens. Is this related to something like the fires? Is there something going on at home that I'm unaware of? Whatever it is, this child's communicating that they're dysregulated and they're not coping.
Yeah, there's an interesting question from the audience that flows onto this, Michelle, which I'll start with you, and Lisa and Janette will naturally have some thoughts as well. And it kind of flips it into this idea of what are the signs that you know a child is recovering? And the other aspect to that was related to, do you have an estimated time frame for a school to recover from a bushfire? So we might start with that first one, Michelle, and then move into Lisa and Janette.
I'd love to have that crystal ball around timelines. You know, from my experience over the 30 years, the sixes seem to be really powerful. We see shifts in how people are coping at the 6 week, the 6 month anniversaries, of course, and 6 years. Don't know why. I'm sure there's an amazing theory, but it plays out time and time again. For schools and recovery and timelines, it really is very dependent on a lot of factors. So when we talk about adversity and trauma responses, we talk about it in terms of what the external or objective factors of the event have been. So was there a sense that the fire was really horrific, you were stuck, you were witness to things? What was your appraisal of it, the subjective? And those two things, the objective and subjective, influence how you then go on from that point of view. So it's very much whatever individual or community experience there's been and what was in the community before, during and after. You know, some communities who have struggled for a long time have lots of good strategies that are protective and know how to manage the system, get back on their feet. Some communities that have never had any adversity to speak of really struggle with that. So how do we know if a child's recovering? It's when they go back to looking happy, engaged, able to ask for help when they need it, in that general developmental range that you would expect and hope them to be, and when they're taking calculated and thought through risks that are safe but a bit tantalizing and a bit opportunity to take a new step into new learning. That's what I see as good mental health in a child, and that's what I would see as a sign of recovery.
Yeah, Lisa, I'm interested to hear the question that was on top of that one was the estimated time frame for a school to recover. And Janette, naturally you've experienced that as well. What is the research showing us around this?
Look, it's a really important question. We're seeking funding to be able to analyse the data in a way that would enable us to answer that question. So in terms of school communities, I can't give you a precise answer, but I totally support Michelle's suggestion. And certainly from the Beyond Bushfire study, what that generated a recommendation in our recent report that when you're looking at recovery in a community from a major disaster, there should be a general understanding that there needs to be a 5-year recovery plan, and that different services might transition in and out at different points, but it takes years. What we need to be mindful of at the moment, of course, is that this wasn't a single disaster. People have been exposed to multiple disasters, and the particular features of the pandemic response, of course, resulted in remote learning, reduced community connectedness, which is a protective factor. So I would expect that will slow down the recovery process.
Thanks, Lisa. And Janette?
Yeah, Ben, it's how long is a piece of string, really, isn't it? People go through different recovery stages in different timelines, and sometimes they revert back. And I know that I just hated to hear comments like, that was 2 years ago, you need to move on. Or I'm picturing a time 5 years later when the staff were becoming exhausted because they'd held it together for that time, supporting students and families. And I was worried about staff welfare, that I was told it's 5 years to move on, and what are your literacy numeracy results like? So it is very tricky. Just if we're talking about some of that data coming through, once we got our 5-year trend data for English online results, which is a start of the year assessment in Victoria, it began to show that the students after the fires were coming into school with a much lower level of oral language development. And so, that is an indicator of the number of years that it's going to take to develop those things, to help them develop their language so that they know that there are more emotions than happy and angry, that the oral language is supporting academic learning, but it has a huge impact on their social learning as well. If they don't have the words to say, excuse me, it's my turn on the slide now, and so just push, there's a whole lot of social learning within there as well.
Ben, can I come? Sorry, Janette. Ben, can I jump back in around that? Because I had the opportunity to catch up with some of my students that I had in 1983 that were year 9s at the time of the Ash Wednesday bushfires. And every time there's another something similar, it re-triggers. They go back and have deep conversations about it. They reflect on how it changed the person they thought they were going to be to the person that they are. And I think it's always important that we keep in mind recovery of a school community, or recovery in any way, is a new normal. You don't go back to being as you were because you've had such an experience that it's added. And there is a thing of post-traumatic growth. And a number of those young people say, I was going this way, now I'm going this way. And in fact, I learned so much about myself and my family and how I can manage in tough times, for example. I also wanted to draw attention to the fact that we see a lot of delayed responses. You know, we're only 18 months at this point, and I see a lot of people who are coping and doing really well. And I've seen people at that point who 2, 5, 8, 10 years suddenly get exhausted and say, you know what, I'm not coping as well as I'd like anymore, and I take it back to when I was in the fires. So 5 years is a really good goal to start for. And I'd love to see opportunity that then we can tailor it to need from 5 to 10 and as we go on, particularly with our younger children who are developing and changing rapidly, because every big sensitive period of growth and development, they'll have new learnings and new reflections on the experiences they had, and it'll have a different meaning at a different time for them.
And Ben, I worry when we have these conversations with people who have been recently affected by disaster, because I'm sure it must be, just awful to hear about the long haul. But at the same time, people tell me that it's validating, that it's helpful to hear that it's not them and it's not because they're not doing a good job. This is a thing that happens, and it's a shared experience. And if it is getting too hard, pay attention to that and engage in those self-care strategies, because it's important to look after yourself and to recognize that this is really difficult and support is often needed.
Yeah, thank you, Lisa, Michelle, and Janette. I feel like we could continue to dive into a full presentation looking at some of these topic areas. And one of the things that I think is a really crucial tool for the listeners today is the appraised tool, and something that they can use that's tangible, that's scaffolded and guiding them to decision making during often quite a stressful period of time. I guess for those that are just starting to use that tool, Lisa, what guidance did you have to them, to using that for the first time?
Well, my guidance would be to realise that it's meant to help. It's not an extra job. And so use it in the way that's useful for you. It's probably a good idea to read some of the intro stuff, but if you don't have time and you're feeling fuzzy, just go to the checklist. If there's a section in the checklist where you think, oh, for goodness sake, I don't know, it's not an exam. Don't worry about it. Just leave that bit blank. It's really just to give you a support in thinking through some of the issues in the decision making. And that's also potentially a useful document to have when you're having a discussion with someone else. There's people from the department, there's people from Bushfire Recovery Victoria or other support agencies who might be quite happy to sit down and work through it with you. So that would be my key message, just to go, it's meant to help, not to make things harder. Use it how it works for you.
Thanks, Lisa. Janette, there's a question that's come through for you around, it's great to hear about you suggesting around the departmental leniencies in regard to school regulations and school improvements, and just any practical tips that you could give to leaders within learning communities to take those steps.
It's tricky, isn't it? Because they're our bosses, and you feel like perhaps they're going to think I'm not doing my job if I don't get these things done. We were in a situation where we had to do our strategic planning the year after the bushfires, and that was when the date was, and so that's what we have to do. I know I got into trouble for not having my performance plan in on time. But if you're doing the job, you don't have time to write about it, do you? So it is tricky. Some of the people in the department above us are more empathetic, I guess, than others, and I think it's important to be honest about the workload that you've got and what you're doing. And look, am I really going to do this because I'm just going to tick the boxes for compliance, or do I really want to make it a working document so it's going to help our schools? And to have those discussions with them. If it's just for compliance, somebody else can do it for you. But if it's something that's really going to help your students or families and your staff move forward, then it's going to be a working document, so it's going to be useful. It may seem airy-fairy and people will come down and say, no, you should have had it in last week. And I don't have the answers for those sorts of things, but I think it's really important to be honest about, I can't do that, I'm already doing this. Or I used to sometimes say to others, but I never said it myself, I've got this amount of time, I can do this or I can do that. What would you like me to drop off my to-do list? I was never going to do it myself, but I had to advise others to do that.
Yeah, it sounds like that communication, but also openness around what what are the key tasks that you're working on at the moment, and prioritizing the ones based on needs. And
I think a lot of people don't realise until they're in your shoes the extra jobs that you have to do that are imposed on you. If they're not in that situation, they wouldn't know that those things have to be done. So keep a tally of them because you'll forget, and make sure you feed them back to them.
And I would hope that, by putting it as a recommendation in our 10 Years Beyond Bushfires report, that people can point to it and go, you know what, these are really official recommendations backing up what I'm requesting. So we're trying to help give people the leverage to achieve those outcomes.
Janette, do you remember we talked at the time about retired principals coming in and partnering and doing the busy work so that you could do the relational work? And I know that can happen informally, and I know some Department of Eds around Australia have looked at formalising that and have brought in buddy principals after large-scale disasters as a way of helping with that administrative load and the predictable load that comes. So my fingers are crossed that, we can formalise some of those things over time. And I think seeing this time, a lot of states and territories education departments have brought in tutors to assist students to do some catching up and have some intensive, that they are starting to see that there needs to be additional resources to help schools to do the busy work as well as the relational and recovery work.
Yes, and as long as there's not too much paperwork to say that you've done that, that just adds to it.
We've got time for one more question today, and thank you for all this depth of explanation. And there's lots of chat function questions coming through, which is a good sign the audience are really engaged in this topic and interested in it. One of the key things to finish on is, maybe for you, Michelle, but for others as well, is what would be one key message for educators to share with parents around supporting their child and family? It's a big one to finish, but
give me one. Seriously? When have I known to be able to stick to one of anything? Goodness me. So I'll have one or two, and I would say parents lose confidence in their ability as parents, and they lose confidence in setting boundaries for children. So to be supportive of parents in understanding that predictability and known boundaries are important safety mechanisms for their children. So it's okay to keep on saying 7 o'clock to bed, and it's okay to be saying, I'll be picking you up at this time, and if you can't get there, you let them know, because it's important parents know that kids need to know that you're going to be there. So teachers can be reinforcing key messages around predictability, psychological safety, routine, and if parents are going to lose it, that they take themselves outside the space they're living in and have a few deep breaths and then come back in, but to understand we're all human and that you can repair these things. So that was more than one, but I got lots in quickly.
Oh, thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Lisa and Janette. It's been really insightful discussion today. And yeah, just on behalf of the audience, we thank you for not only the participation today, but just the work you're doing in the field and continue to do in the field. So we thank you for that. And for those that have tuned in today, there's a lot of questions we didn't quite get to. So we'll do our best to send that out as a bit of a resource pack. there will be some resources we'll attach, including links to the appraised tool and other things as well. So yeah, thank you very much. And yeah, stay tuned for more information from BU and the Bushfire Response Program.